Hi and welcome back to MDriven learning course. So this is chapter 8 and let's just recap a bit where we are. We have a person that has cars person used to own. So there can be multiple of those. And of course a car could have been owned by several people. So previous owner is a multi-link back. So it can be many of those. And always when we have these many-to-many relationships, it's very common to feel the need to have some extra information on the combination of two specific objects, and that's what we typically put in a link object or association clause like this. So we call this one historic ownership, and that's connected to the association. And if we point at association, we can see that it has an association clause. So here we were able to switch it as well. Of course, we added it by using the association clause connection mode and dragging a link from here to this association here. Yeah, and we're gonna take things in a little bit of a different direction. We have talked about the crude work on this model, and also what's important is that we didn't have the facts initially that I did this association as one-to-many and there was only one previous owner, and that was of course wrong. And as you work with the material, you will discover these kinds of issues with your thinking. So this is what we call thinking bugs, and we will never get away from those. What's really good about having a low-cost approach to investigate your thoughts is that the thinking bugs can be checked. You can check your thinking by running the application really early, and there's really no cost connected to being wrong. It's only good. So whenever you find out that you're wrong, it's good. And because if you're wrong, that means that you know what's right, and then you will come closer to truth and closer to the system that you actually want to deliver. This is a very different or rather important aspect of being able to test your ideas this fast. The ability to be wrong, the ability to just do something and see what happens. So even when you end up with extremely much larger models than this, when you're in production and you have customers that you have trusted your work for several years and you're still doing changes, you will still be wrong from time to time, and that's okay. And it's important to even if you know, the die-hard guys with the C++ under their arm say that they are never wrong, that's not really true. I know. So everyone is wrong, and that's fine. So let's carry on a bit with the view model that we did for this, and we had this person view model, and what's practical is to drag it on to a diagram like this, because then you have everything connected. So whenever you need to check this diagram, and maybe we should give that diagram a specific name, diagram of person and car. Whenever you're on this diagram, you can easily just double click this to get into the correct view model. So you got everything in one place. As we did this view model, we had the grid lines, and we were able to move things around in this grid, and that turned into a UI in the running application. Let's see if we can get that started. So we have the turnkey prototyper. I'm going to start the turnkey prototyper, and we will get a browser going here. And let's see where we were. We were here somewhere. Person seeker, I'm in control, and gonna bring up this person, show person, or this one rather. So this is the UI, and one issue with this UI is that it's sort of blocky, and it's not what is usually called responsive. It won't like maybe this button should fold down under here when things get tight, and maybe this shouldn't really be a data grid like this. Maybe it should be something else, so to visualize this, and that's fair. That kind of extra display work is often needed on the front-facing parts of your application. So we're going to look on how to turn this fast-rendered UI into a more designed, responsive web page that we want to show our client in the end. So this dialog blocked, so I'm gonna go here. So to get responsive design, we need to put in some more effort into the view. It's the same thing, it's the same idea that you turn data that's available in the model through these simple expressions, in this case just self being the root object person, following the taking the attribute name, etc. So there's no major differences in that. It still will be a view model, but we'll turn on responsiveness by putting things in containers or flexible containers. So how we do that is that we turn the whole view model into we're adding a placing container. So what happened then is that we got this placing containers as row, and we also got these warnings, because once you turn it in, you add a placing container, all these columns really should live inside this or other placing containers. So I'm just going to move these things in like this. And so all the warnings are gone, good. But what happened here? Well, now we got some new controls here as well. So we can see how wide will this UI be, and how will it look when it's this wide, and how will it look when it's this high. So this placing container is of type row. The placing containers, once selected, will get a few more properties that you can set. So once we select it, we can see there's an arrow here. Gonna make this. So this is the general direction that everything we put in it will get. So that's why everything ends up like this on a big row. So if we were to save that and go back to yeah, let's see where we were. We were here. Yeah. So we can see that everything is put on a row. Everything works as before, but it looks worse than what it did a minute ago. So, but this is just the beginning, and we're gonna need to experiment a bit with these placing containers. So what you can do is easily add child placing containers. So that's one important aspect. But let's start with the settings on the placing container, because now it says row. What you can do is switch to column. So column will be like this instead. So the direction is from top to bottom, and it will add all the controls on top of each other instead of in a line like this. So that's a row, and this is a column. So saving that, we got this UI. So that UI is not too shabby, but maybe far from what we want. And let's see. What we can do is we want this grid to be at the bottom. So I'm going to move that down. We also want this placing container that will stretch the whole page. That's good. So if things get higher, yeah, the placing container will grow, but the grid here won't follow along. Can we do anything about that? So the historic ownership grid, can we make that grow when there's more space? Yes, because once we turned on placing containers, there was additional properties made available for us for the view model columns. And one of them is an instruction to grow. So the instruction to grow is implicitly set to 1, even if there's no value, and 1 is not actually growth, it's just stay your size. But if we put something larger than 1, it will grow. So that made this grid to take on the space below it, because there was nothing stopping it from growing. And if the height of this the grid will grow like this, which is probably a good thing for us. So I'm going to save that, and heading back here. So now we can see that this grid fills the lower bottom of the page. What we also can see here is that we have the left side menu buttons, and maybe sometimes these are really practical because it's automatic. They will always show up and they will follow your, like the class actions, as we have seen, will follow everything that you define in your model instantly. So it's a really quick and practical way to get functionality made available to the user. But you might still want to remove this and take responsibility by adding buttons for the functions instead. So one setting on the view model is to drop this left side. And we find that setting up on the view model root here, and we're going to say hide sidebar. I'm going to save, and once saved, that menu disappeared altogether. Need to take a little bit care here, because when I do changes, I don't even get the save button, because we have said that we weren't interested in that kind of functionality. So we will need to have at least a save button. So we're gonna add a save button to this UI immediately, so that I can go on. So I'm going to call this action column save. to get access to these kinds of functions, save and a few more, there's a variable that denotes the view model itself, and that has some functionality for us. So self VM is the view model itself, and that has an operation called save. So that's good. We want to do that from time to time. Yeah, from time to time. When do we want to do it? Because now maybe we should put it on the very top here. So when do we want to do it? We can add the visible expression for that. Let's do the disable expression. So when should this be disabled? Well, again with the self VM, we have a variable called dirty list, or rather a property of this self VM variable. Dirty list. Dirty list, so dirty is what we call all objects that has some kind of change on them. So those are the only ones that are actually targeted for save. And whenever you do MDriven stuff, you should know that we track each attribute and each association individually. So saving doesn't mean that you save every property on the object. It's only the ones that are made dirty in some sense. So the dirty list, and what we can do on that is check its size. So if we have 0 in this, we should probably be disabled, so read only true. So that would be one way of doing it, but there's an operator for checking if a size is 0, and that is empty. So if the dirty list is empty, then we probably shouldn't be enabled. Let's see if that gives us what we want. So now this is not enabled, but as soon as I do a change to the name, this becomes enabled. So that's cool. And if I were to save, then the dirty information is of course reset, because now the objects within this view will be saved, and then it will be grayed out again. Maybe we don't want it grayed out, maybe we want to hide it altogether. So on the save button, we set the disabled expression to the dirty list is empty. But we could also set the visible expression to the invert of this, because it's going to be visible when it's not empty. So that would be one way of doing it. Could just copy this and say that this should be not empty. But it's a bit repetitive. This is not an uncommon case that we want to negate the enablement to use it as visibility information. So we're going to clear this one and instead follow this, check this button, follow enable. So this is a disable expression, which is basically a negate, inverted enable expression, right? So I'm going to follow enable on the visible. What that means is that the save button won't even show, because the visible expression that follows the enable, which is a not of the disable expression, the logical operator not inverting the result of the disabled expression. So it won't show until I do some change to an object here. Then it both becomes enabled and shows. And once I use it and save, it will disappear again. So that's one way to work with the buttons that are just in time and available for certain scenarios. Yes, so this was placing container on this level. Some more important settings is that, as we can see on the web, these all stretch. That's because there's a different default on these in VPF, which this is rendered with, and in HTML, which this is rendered with. But let's see if we can set them to the same. So what this says, align items, the childs, that's the X direction in this case because we're a column. It's set to not set, but the web actually defaults that to stretch. So we're going to have stretch here. That makes it similar. The thing we see here is the same thing that we see here. Actually, the VPF has this defaulted to start, and if we set it to start and save, we will see that the web get similar to this, that things are not stretched across the screen because they are want to go to start. And of course, if we instead set that they should go to end, everything will jump here. Saving will give us the same effect on the web. There's a few other settings, but start, end, and stretch are the important ones. So these will work on the whole placing container. From time to time, you will want to have one that deviates from the norm. And if we take this delete me action here, we want to make that not aligned end as we have it now. Then we can do a self align on that one. So normally those are not set, but and we can see that the parent, in this case the placing container, has end, so that's why we're over here. But maybe we want this one to be start, and if we save, we get this effect. So that's how you would go about doing simple overrides of this. But normally they are not set, and normally we have a good way to do what we want by setting it on the placing container. Other important concepts with the placing containers are that they are stackable. So you're going to add a child placing container. Actually, I'm going to add 2. And what happened then was that we got these arrows down here. They don't really make much noise currently because there's nothing in them. So that's by design, so to speak. But we can take this grid and put that into one of them. And what happened then was that the growing thing sort of disappeared because we put the grow on the grid itself. But what we really want to do now is to have this one to grow in this direction. So first we're going to make it a column. So now it's a column, and then it looks like this. And we can remove this yeah, we probably want to have that grow still. But on this column, we want that child column to take on space. So we're going to instruct that to grow as well. And now we see that this one is stuck to the corner, and that's because stuck to the left side. Because this placing container doesn't have the align items set to stretch. As soon as it stretch, we get the same effect back. So what we can do with the child placing containers, we're gonna try to move stuff into this one. So now everything is on a line over here, and maybe we should have the save button at the top like this. And I'm gonna save and watch how that behaves. So what we want to do typically is to make lines like this. I don't say that, I'm not saying that we should have it looking like this at all times, but lines like this should be able to wrap. That's a central part of doing responsive design, the wrapping part. And so we can go to this placing container, and then we say that we allow it to wrap. And already in design, we should be able to see what happens when space get tight. Gonna save that and check if that's also true in runtime. So as space get tight, things fold. So that's something that we typically want. And if we were to do a change so that the save button pops up, we can see that things move to make room for the save button. And as I save, things are moved back. Working with placing containers, the language gets sort of simplified, and I've said the word placing containers too many times. It's not really very intuitive or a good way to speak about definition. So we should probably give each placing container a name. So on this root placing container, we call it main. As I give it a name, that will also show up in this overview tree. So the column main, and this top placing container in the main I will call that top part, and I will call this lower thing for the grid holder. This way, when I talk about the definition of my view model, I get a little bit richer language, and that's really important because language is everything. So that's we really need to be able to express ourselves with words, because that's the main the main fuel that our brains work with, and so we always need to have words for things in order to think fast and correctly about stuff. That's just my personal opinion, but the official opinion of MDriven. So there you got it. Good. As we saw on these buttons, we are a bit misaligned, and that will be one effect of taking ownership of the rendering. So I probably want to add a margin to these buttons to push them down to be on the line. So I'm gonna head over to here and say that there's a margin. This is a top margin. Let's just try something. I'm gonna write 20 and save and see if that's good for me, and it feels pretty good. So I'm gonna go for 20 on these other buttons as well. And now I see we will probably work on this so that we don't get this mismatch on the rendering, how it looks here and how it looks here. Our ambition is that it should be fairly similar and not like this as I show you now. So beg your pardon for that. Next thing to know with placing containers is the ability to actually take control of this grid rendering. You do that by right-clicking and adding a placing container to that. In order to take control of the grid, you actually need two placing containers. One for the whole area, which will hold the rows, and one for each row. So I need at least one child placing container. In this child placing container that represents each row in the data, I will drag in the data that I want to show. And I can see there will be 3 sections rendered for me. This is how it will look, and that's because the first one is a row and the second one is a row. But to make it more list view like, I probably want this one to be a column. Like that. And if I save this, I get a UI that looks like this. Not a grid anymore, it's a rendered UI that if I were to add a car that I used to own, I'm gonna add them all because I can't remember which one. I get a new row like this. So that's a practical thing to keep in mind, that you can control the UI fully and even the grid parts of it this way. And we probably should mention that since you own both the whole of the list view definition and each row, you can easily do things like card views or things that stack along the x-axis and then wrap. So let's try to do this as a row and have that row to allow to wrap. And I'm going to save that and see how that behaves. So now that I get a big screen, I get the whole second row jumping up next to the first one. And I'm gonna add him back because when I hadn't saved the work, the add. So now I have 3 rows and going like this. If I do go really wide, I get all 3 rows next to each other. So that's the kind of logic that you get from a fluent or adaptive UI like this. So that's pretty much everything I'm gonna show you that we're gonna talk about today, or that the task that I want you to perform. And the goal of this is to familiar yourself with the placing containers and the extra bit of work that it entails to get the UI as you want it. And also make sure that you always know that you are in full control, that you probably do grid-based UI initially to be fast and not think too much about layout and design. And as work progresses, you take some of the UIs and give them a bit more love with placing containers. So until next time.